Good morning, World Wide Web. Jumping online today, Saturday, November 25th, for our November live stream. I'll be going live at the top of the hour. Hello, Pink Meadows. You're always first to be here. Makes me so happy. Hello, MS. Hello, Sharon. It's great to see everyone today. Do me a kind favor and let me know, is the audio okay? You can hear me okay? Please let me know if the music is too loud. Got one of our wonderful moderators here. Marla, it's great to see you. Equine Eats and Treats, great to see you. Hello, Caesar. Hello, Daddy Me. Hello, Mel. Hello, Selena. Good morning. Good morning, Caesar. Indeed. Linda, howdy, howdy in South Carolina. Hello, J-Dog in Chicago. This is fantastic. Summer's representing Virginia. I've got Brandy on the line. As you guys jump on, please tell me where you're jumping on from. I'm glad to hear that the sound is good. I've got the river cam in the background. As you know, we're going to go live at the top of the hour. Yes, and so MS Gunsel says, if we get 100 people, will we start early? Yes, we will. And there's already 54 of you, so I better be cautious. Please take a moment to get yourself situated, grab yourself a beverage, take a bio break if you need to. As of right now, we'll start at the top of the hour unless we get 100 people. Bulgaria representing. This is fantastic. River's in her spot. Comfy cozy next to the window. It's great to see you. Armand in Illinois. Hello, Celine down in Florida. Welcome, welcome. While you're waiting and getting situated, I'm going to show you a video that I played earlier this month. This is one of my Monday morning videos. I thought I would play it here for you for a bit while I spend some time getting things set up. So without further ado, please enjoy. So you've been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. You're hooked up with a neurologist and they're telling you that you have to take an MS medicine. Why bother? What's the point of taking an MS medicine if you can't cure multiple sclerosis? My name's Aaron Boster. I'm an MS neurologist and the founder of the Boster Center for MS. And in this video, I'm going to answer that exact question. Don't turn away, because all of that starts right now. Hey! Howdy! Thanks for learning about MS with me, Aaron Boster. Many patients pose the question, why bother? What's the point? Why should I take an MS disease-modifying therapy? And it's a fair question, and it deserves a straightforward answer. So in this video, I wanted to share with you my rationale for recommending why people impacted by MS benefit from taking a disease-modifying therapy. Get out a pen and paper and let's jump in. It's my goal to help you live your very best life despite having multiple sclerosis. And in my almost 20 years of experience in helping families impacted by MS, that involves a multi-pronged approach. We absolutely have to pay attention to diet and exercise, no question about it. We absolutely have to pay attention to behavioral and lifestyle things if we want to live our best life. But bluntly, that's inadequate. Just behavioral measures alone, just diet and exercise alone, do not adequately slow down this nasty disease. And the earliest application of the most effective disease-modifying therapy is a key element to winning. Let me try to explain why. MS is a tricky disease because you can actually develop neurological disability from two different ways. You can have something that we call RAW, R-A-W, relapse-associated worsening. In English, you have an MS attack and you don't fully recover. So if I use an example, God forbid you suffer an optic neuritis and you go blind in your eye, and then it comes back part way and you're still legally blind, you can't really see very well with that eye, you have accrued a degree of disability from an incomplete recovery from attack. There's a second way that you can develop disability, which we call PIRA, P-I-R-A, progression independent from relapse activity. And this is insidious. You get worse neurologically, but there's no attack. And bluntly, almost all people impacted by MS can experience both. And lifestyle, exercise, and diet by itself don't do a very good job of slowing those things down. The MS disease-modifying therapies do. And in particular, the newer disease-modifying therapies can do a pretty bang-up job at stopping a lot of that. And so let me break that down for you. I consider 4 goals when using a disease-modifying therapy: stopping MS attacks, stopping new lesions on the brain, slowing brain volume loss, and preventing or slowing down the accrual of disability, neurological disability. So let's take each one of those in turn, starting with relapse reduction or stopping relapses. The MS medicines that are currently FDA approved are all different flavors of anti-inflammatories. Now, I don't mean like an aspirin, but it's an anti-inflammatory mechanism stopping acute inflammation in the brain and spinal cord. The goal here is to prevent new MS attacks from occurring. Now, if you've suffered attacks in the past and you've accrued RAW, you have disability because you didn't fully recover from an optic neuritis, let's say, and you start a disease-modifying therapy, you don't recover what you previously lost. By way of example, if you have 3 children and you start taking an oral birth control pill, you still have 3 children. They don't go away, they're already born. You're taking an oral birth control pill in this example to prevent an unplanned pregnancy. And my joke is, if you want to know why you're taking birth control, go hang out with your 3 kids. Just teasing. But the same logic applies to a disease-modifying therapy. You're taking the disease-modifying therapy because you don't want another attack. We can't give you back what you lost oftentimes. In this respect, the disease-modifying therapy is literally an insurance policy against a future attack. Now, some patients untreated can have an attack very frequently, like an attack every year. Other patients, untreated, may have an attack every 5 years, but either way, we want to prevent them. The reason is because about 42% of people that have attacks never walk the earth the same. They never fully recover, and they accrue significant neurological disability. And so taking that disease-modifying therapy is one of your best tools to prevent a future attack. That's number 1. Number 2, we want to prevent new brain spots. So let's break this down a little bit. When I say that you have a new spot on your MRI, or I say that you have a lesion on the brain or on the spinal cord, I'm using doctor talk. If I spoke plainly, what I would say is that's brain damage, that's spinal cord damage. Now, if I asked your significant other how much more brain damage are they okay with you accruing, they would say none, 0. They don't want any new brain damage. And yet, when we're looking for spots on the MRI, quite literally, we're looking at new areas of damaged brain tissue, the only untransplantable organ system. When you have new lesions on your MRI or on your spinal cord, to me, that's the exact same issue as when you have an attack. It just didn't manifest clinically, but it's just as concerning. And there's profound, ample, lots and lots of evidence supporting the idea that the more spots you have, particularly in the first 5 or 10 years, the worse long-term outcome you're going to have. Now, one of the ways that I try to explain this is using an analogy. So let's pretend that I blew a hole in that wall. All right, so now there's a giant hole in the wall and they don't patch it. They just leave it there. Now, fast forward 20, 25 years and the building that I'm in gets older and the materials in the building start to wear out. Which wall falls first? That's right, the one with the damage. And in the same fashion, if you have an area of your brain that has been damaged, you have brain damage, as you age, that area is going to wear out faster and you're going to accrue disability. And so lesions up front lead to disability down the line. And we can prevent that with highly effective disease-modifying therapies. Again, you're buying an insurance policy, not so that you can feel better in the now, but so that you can preserve the neurologic reserve, so that you can preserve brain tissue and brain function, not for today, but for time to come. That's number 2. Hey, real quick before we go on, if you found this video to be useful, do me a kind favor and give it a thumbs up. Also, if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. Those 2 actions teach the YouTube algorithm that you like this content and help push it out so more families impacted by MS can benefit. Thank you. Number 3 has to deal with brain volume, the size of your brain. So after the age of 18, all brains shrink a little bit every year on purpose. In the same way that as we get older, we get a little bit shorter. And as we get older, our skin gets a little thinner. As we get older, our brains shrink a little bit each year, about 0.2% a year on average. In the setting of untreated MS, however, brains shrink much faster, upwards of 10 times faster in some extreme cases. And brain shrinkage, the doctor term is atrophy, brain shrinkage is one of the very tightest correlates to long-term disability and cognitive impairment. And so we want to do something to slow down brain volume loss. Now, there are behavioral things like not smoking, like treating cardiovascular risk factors. I believe supplementing vitamin D, exercise. Those are things that can help slow brain volume loss, but it's not adequate. Many of the newer disease-modifying therapies can quite literally slow down the rates of brain volume loss. Some of them are remarkable, and they can allow the brain of someone with MS to shrink at the same rate as the general population. And I want that for you. I want to preserve the neurologic reserve. That's number 3. Number 4 has to do with slowing neurological progression of disability, so slowly getting worse over time. The natural history of a disease is a doctor's way of saying, hey, if I don't do anything, what do I expect to have happen? And the natural history of MS is that the human being progresses in neurological disability as they age, which is really nasty stuff. We want to slow that down to the very best of our ability. And in the best case scenarios, we want to halt it completely. Now, transparently, the current disease-modifying therapies that are available, I make this video in 2023, can't adequately stop that in its tracks. But it can slow it down, and that's worthwhile. I've had patients say, well, if I'm going to progress anyways, what's the point? Well, I can slow the progression of disability. And whereas I'm not proud of that, I would like to be able to stop it completely, it's still very, very important so that you can live your best life despite having this disease. If we take you and clone you, now we'd have to get permission from your family, and they may say no, but just humor me. We clone you, so there's 2 copies of you. And we give one of you a disease-modifying therapy and a hug, and the other one just gets a hug. And then we come back 5 years later. What we will find is the version of you that got just a hug has accrued more neurological disability. They have more problems with thinking, with bowel and bladder, with walking, etc., compared to the version of you that got a disease-modifying therapy and a hug. And I think that's very, very worthwhile. Are MS disease-modifying therapies magical? No, absolutely not. Do we need to do better? Yes, we do. But are they worthwhile? Yes, very much so. The future is very, very bright. At the Boster Center for MS, we're participating in multiple research studies in hopes of finding MS disease-modifying therapies that can better control smoldering MS, the slow burn in the background leading to neurological disability. At present, there's a lot that these medicines can do. And I really want you to take the most effective disease-modifying therapy that you're comfortable taking. In the future, when we have better drugs, we'll offer them to you. But I want you to live your very best life now. Thanks for learning about MS with me, Aaron Boster. And if you want to up your game, click the video that's on your screen right now. And until... Howdy! Good morning, everyone. Aaron Boster here on this rather cold November morning. It is Saturday, the 25th of November. This is our monthly live stream for the Boster Center for Multiple Sclerosis, and I am absolutely tickled to start a little early. I normally like to turn the mics and stuff on about a half an hour before the top of the hour. I normally go live at 11. Although I've noticed increasingly that we're amassing this village faster and faster. And I can't believe that it's a quarter till the top of the hour and we've already hit 120 people. Wow. Thank you very, very much. If this is your first time joining, welcome. This growing global online village fills me with energy, and I am so excited to spend an hour or so with you answering your MS questions. You'll notice that there are several amazing moderators that are helping keep everything copacetic. If you have a question, please type it in the chat. Please keep your questions general so that everyone can benefit. I can't diagnose or treat you over the interwebs with just a little bit of information. And so it works much better if we can get general questions thrown out there. Also, as you jump online, make sure to share where you're calling in from. It's amazing to watch as this global glowing online village gets bigger and bigger. Make sure that you have your water with you because we're going to do the MS Water Challenge, yo. You know how this works. When I drink water, you drink water. Let's do it up. That's really, really good. In full disclosure, I haven't quit my coffee yet this morning, and so you're going to see me doing both. If you have not yet signed up for the monthly Boster Corner newsletter, please consider doing so. Signing up for the newsletter is completely free. Once a month, we will send you the newsletter to your email, and in the newsletter, it'll tell you when I go live, and so that way you'll never miss an upcoming live event. By popular demand, you see that the river cam is on in the background, and that's my beautiful puppy, the clinic dog River, who comes to clinic almost every day with me. In the past, you guys have really enjoyed seeing her online, and so I thought I'd bring her again today. I've got a lot of things in store for you. I've got a micro lecture planned on biosimilars that I'll be excited to share with you in a little bit. And I have some pre-planned questions that I've preloaded into this chat, as well as taking your questions live. So without any further ado, thank you so much for being here, all 130 of you. God bless, and let's get going. Damien D gets the first question of the day. Damien D writes, quick question. With numbness and tingling in my legs and feet, what does it mean if I'm having stabbing pains in my ankles when I walk? I'm in Jackson, Missouri today. So let's talk about sensation and different kinds of sensory changes in the setting of MS. So as my mentor Omar Khan used to say, sometimes nature can be a little too generous, and you can have a myriad of sensory abnormalities in the setting of MS. When you think about the way sensation is structured, and so I'll get up to do a little demonstration here. I'm trying to get it fit into the camera. So you've got my, let's see here we go. You got my leg here that you can barely see, okay? Now if you touch my leg, all right, a message needs to go up the nerve of the leg, up the spinal cord to get to the brain where it registers, hey, you've been touched. And when you've had spinal cord damage from MS, that touch goes normally up the nerve, but when it gets to that damaged part of your spinal cord, it gets muddled. And so the information that gets to the brain is not normal sensory information. The information that the brain interprets might be an abnormal sensation, like a numbness or like a burning pain, some type of abnormal sensation. Now, to talk about this for a few seconds, some of you have probably played that game Operator, like when you were a little kid and you'd sit around in a big circle, or telephone. And the person who starts would say some silly phrase like monkey butts. And then the next person would listen and say monkey butts. And then the next person would say gorilla butts. And then the next person would say gorilla toots. And then the next and it would keep changing. And by the time it got all the way around, the last person would have heard something like elephants fly, which has nothing to do with monkey butts. And in a very similar fashion, that's kind of what's happening with the spinal cord, where the information coming in is getting muddled and what the brain finally interprets is abnormal. Now, in this question, Damien is sharing that in addition to numbness and tingling, there's now a new sensation, and not a very nice one. There's actually a painful sensation. So what could that be coming from? Well, it could be a new neurological sensation from the same spinal cord damage. That's possible. It could be worsening pain in part because of the spasticity that you may be experiencing. Why? Because you're walking in Missouri and it's cold out. It could be a musculoskeletal thing. And what we can settle on is that it's not normal and that it's pretty yucky. And so what can we do about it? Well, if it persists beyond a day or two, if it's in fact new and it's sticking around, I think that's worthwhile to holler at your neurologist to make sure that we're not dealing with new neurological disease activity. Fortunately, there's a million ways of addressing neuropathic pain, because that's what this is, a form of pain in MS. And there's all kinds of lotions and potions to try to help make it better. That was a great initial question, Damien. Thank you for kicking us off today. Let's go to the next question. Let's see here. Reading along. Kathy Chambers is in the house. Kathy, thank you for joining us. What other diagnoses could be possible with brain lesions that don't appear to be MS? However, the person continues to fall a couple times a month and has double or multiple other neurological symptoms. This is my son's cat, Mewtwo. He is a troublemaker. Yes, you are. Aren't you a troublemaker? Do you want to say hi to the internet? Say hi, internet. So let's sort out this question. A lesion in the brain is nothing more than a white spot on the MRI. And the white spot on the MRI doesn't have a label. So when you see the white lesion, it doesn't have a label telling you the answer. What we are trying to do in neurology and what they do in neuroradiology is they look at the size, the shape, and the location of that spot to help us understand what it actually is. You can also give contrast dye and see how the lesion changes when you give contrast dye, and all of these things can help you clarify what is that spot. And everything that's a spot is not MS. So if I wrote at the top of the wall, let me find a wall here. Yeah, so if I wrote at the top of the wall right here, things that can cause a white spot on an MRI, I would start writing and I'd be writing and I'd write all the way down to the bottom of the wall, and I wouldn't be done listing things that can cause a white spot. And so, in fact, there's a host of things. The MRI by itself is not uniquely diagnostic for MS. It takes a village of information. And there's not enough information here in this question for me to take it any further, but thank you very much for asking. Let's keep on keeping on. So Jenny O points out, how can my doctor say that MS isn't hereditary, but I have it, my sister has it, my cousin has it? So what the heck? So the reality is that our understanding of MS is incomplete. And we don't consider MS to be a classically genetically transmitted condition. What do I mean by that? There are certain conditions like cystic fibrosis or sickle cell anemia, where if you have it, 1 in 2 or 1 in 4 of your kids is gonna have it, okay? And that's sort of a classic genetic condition, or at least what we think about it in the lay population. When you have MS, it's not the same. And so if you have multiple sclerosis and your neighbor does not have multiple sclerosis, your neighbor's children have a risk of MS of about 1 in 350, just like your neighbor. So the average risk of MS in the Midwest is 1 in 350. But if you have MS, your child's risk of MS is actually higher. It's like 1 in 40. So all first-degree relatives have a slight increased risk. So your child, your sibling, or your parent technically would have a risk more like 1 in 40. And so just because your family has a 1 in 40 risk doesn't mean they're all going to have MS. There are, however, families where you can see pockets of multiple sclerosis. And here's an example. Jenny O shares that in her family, there's a pocket of multiple sclerosis where multiple family members all have MS. And this has been reported in just maybe under 10% of all MS cases tend to have a hereditary component. Now, what does that mean? It means that our Kung Fu is not that strong and we don't fully understand the entirety of the genetic makeup or the genetic predisposition in that particular family. Now, for those of us that are listening today, if you have multiple sclerosis, you do not need to live in fear that your family members will contract MS. You don't. And there are things that we believe you can do to lower their risk. So let's just go over those really quick. First, a sip of coffee. So what are some things that we can do to lower the family's risk of having MS? One is to supplement vitamin D in family members. So we do believe that driving the vitamin D level up above 50 is associated with less presentation of attacks and so on and so forth. The second thing that you can do is avoid morbid obesity, because it turns out that obesity, particularly pre-puberty, increases the risk to develop MS. Another thing you can do is make sure that they're not smoking cigarettes, because smoking cigarettes increases the risk to develop MS almost double. And those are some things that we have shown that can definitely help. If you could avoid contracting Epstein-Barr, all right, so EBV, mononucleosis, glandular fever, the kissing flu, that would also massively, massively decrease your risk to develop MS. However, it's really hard to do that because we don't know how to prevent getting EBV. So that was an excellent question. Thank you very much for asking it. Here's another outstanding question, this time from Melissa Brady. And Melissa writes in, what can I do to help memory fog? And so memory fog, cog fog, brain fog, cognitive fatigue, we're all talking about the same monster here, all right? We're all talking about one of the most common symptoms in multiple sclerosis, and in fact, an invisible symptom in the setting of multiple sclerosis. When I think about managing MS, and I think about helping someone live their very best life, despite having the condition, I always want to tackle invisible symptoms. And the most common invisible symptoms that I see are the triad of the up there's and the triad of the down there's. Now let's stick to the up there's for this question. The up there's is energy, mood, thinking, and memory. And so it's unfortunately extremely common that someone impacted by MS can have trouble with the up there's. They can have deficits in mood, whether that be anxiety or depression. They can have profound and pathologic fatigue, and they can have difficulty with thinking and memory. It's all too frequent. Now, the difficulty with thinking and memory in MS is not an Alzheimer's type dementia, where you over time forget how to do things and forget who people are and forget your environment and stuff of that ilk. Unfortunately, cognitive impairment in MS is nothing like that, nothing at all. In the setting of multiple sclerosis, when people have cognitive impairment, when they have cog fog, when they have brain fog, they typically are dealing with what neurologists call prefrontal function. All right, so in the very front of your brain are these brain structures that help with what we call executive functioning. And they help with things like remembering lists. They help with things like doing things on the fly. They help with things like maintaining multiple lists in your head at the same time or planning out activities. And in the setting of MS, they can become impaired. And it's actually very common that someone impacted by MS can have some difficulty with thinking and memory. Now, does that mean that they're going to lose their job and they're not going to be able to do things? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It does mean that they can have difficulties with attention. And if you have trouble attending to a task, it's very hard to remember it later. And so when you have trouble with attention and then you can't remember something later, what you end up experiencing is, I'm very forgetful, all right? And there are many things that we can do in the setting of MS to help with that. So let's list a couple. Now, before I do that, let me just check the chat. I think that we're doing okay. So what are some things that we can do to help with cog fog in the setting of multiple sclerosis? What are some options? So one thing that we can do is we can make sure that we get restorative sleep. That sounds like something your mom would say because your mom was right. That getting 8 hours of restorative sleep is critical so that you can live your best life despite having MS. Now, most red-blooded Americans, we get less than 8 hours of sleep. In fact, most red-blooded Americans budget for less than 8 hours of sleep. What do I mean by that? What I mean is if you get into the bed at midnight and your alarm goes off at 6, you're budgeting for only 6 hours of sleep, which is wholly inadequate. And so for starters, I need you to budget for 8 hours of sleep. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be snoozing the whole 8 hours, but at least try to help yourself out by going to bed at 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 10 to 6 is going to at least budget for 8 hours. The second thing is we need to make sure that it's restorative sleep. So if you're getting up to go pee-pee multiple times a night, you're not getting restorative sleep. If you're waking with spasms and cramps and Charlie horses and neuropathic pain, you're not getting restorative sleep. If your legs spasm and wake you up, then you're not getting restorative sleep. If you have restless leg syndrome and when you get in bed, you have the compulsion to move your legs, driving you bonkers, you're not getting restorative sleep. If you have obstructive sleep apnea and you wake yourself up snoring, you're not getting restorative sleep. And we have to address all of those things if we are going to help you get adequate sleep so that you can have enough energy in the morning. The second thing is we want to up your water game. And you know what that means? It's time for the MS Water Challenge, yo. When I drink, you drink. Delicious. All right, how do we get this off the screen? You may have noticed that I have a little biohack here. I threw some lemon in my water. It makes it absolutely tasty. For those of you listening today that don't love yourself some water, I don't either. I like sparkling water because it's more fun to drink, but I ran out. And so instead, I'll throw a little lemon in my water, and that makes it much more manageable. Now, on the spirit of what else can we do to help with cog fog, we've talked about some sleep-related things. We need you to hydrate. And you think, well, Aaron, why do I have to hydrate? We're talking about thinking and memory. I know. Being dehydrated will make you have more trouble with thinking and memory. Honest. And if you don't believe me, try it. Try drinking an adequate amount of water, and you'll be shocked at some of the value that you'd get, including from cog fog. Now, getting adequate exercise helps with thinking and memory. Time and time again, there are studies that demonstrate that if you exercise as part of your lifestyle, you think more clearly, which sounds like a really, really good idea. Now let's just do two more because there's a bunch of other questions pending, although I could talk about this for quite some time. So two other things that I want to be thinking about are, one is polypharmacy. So what is polypharmacy? So poly is Latin for a lotta. Pharmacy is a reference to medicines. So polypharmacy is doctor talk for way too many medicines, dude. And the average person with MS is taking 7 medicines, which by definition is too many, polypharmacy. And the reason that can be a problem is some of the medicines that you're taking could impair thinking and memory. Many of the medicines that we use for bladder, many of the medicines that we use for pain, many of the medicines that we use for spasticity, many of the medicines that we use for good purposes, unfortunately can impair thinking and memory. And so it's important that we are constantly screening your medicines and making sure that we're reducing ones that can be reduced, we're stopping ones that can be stopped, and we're replacing ones that are naughty that can cause impairments to function. Now, lastly, before we move on to a new topic, there are medicines which can vastly help with thinking and memory in the setting of MS. Now, these are not the medicines that came out for Alzheimer's disease because those don't work in MS. These are medicines that help with attention, things like stimulants. So I use a lot of medicines like Adderall, Focalin, things like Ritalin. I also use a lot of stimulants like Provigil and Nuvigil in my practice because they help trick your brain into being more awake. That was an outstanding question. Thank you for asking it. Before we leave the screen, let us take a couple questions that were asked ahead of time. And so this is a question that was asked by Rajan. It says, hi, I wanted to know more about breastfeeding using Ocrevus. And given that the vast majority of people with MS are women of childbearing potential, and given that Ocrevus is one of the most used medicines to treat MS on the planet, and given the fact that breastfeeding is fantastic for the health of the baby, let's talk about this for a hot second, after a sip of coffee. So Ocrevus is a monoclonal antibody. It's a protein, it's an antibody that you infuse in your vein, and it floats around the body. And if you breastfeed, some of the Ocrevus will go from the bloodstream into the breast milk, and from the breast milk into the baby's mouth and into their stomach. And so there's a concern about, hey, what if you give your baby Ocrevus through the breast milk by accident? Couldn't that be a concern? And theoretically, that could be a concern. And so let me share with you 2 ways of addressing this. Let me share 3 ways of addressing it. The dumb way is to just say, well, you're not allowed to have any medicine while you're breastfeeding. Next patient, right? And the reason I say that's dumb is because it's not very thoughtful. And in fact, there might be some other workarounds. But that is the default neurologist answer of no, right? We don't want to take any risk. But I think that we can be a little bit more intelligent than that. So first of all, after your baby hits about 6 months or so, the stomach of the child develops enough and the stomach acid develops enough that essentially anything you put in the baby's mouth from a protein standpoint is going to get dissolved. So for example, if you give your toddler, let's say your 8-month-old, a piece of meat, they don't poop out a piece of meat, right? Because in their stomach, the meat is digested. It's broken down by the acid in the stomach. And similarly, if you give the infant an antibody, right, it's going to dissolve in the stomach. And so there's a bit of rational sense that could be applied here. And I'll give you a great example. I have a wonderful patient, a lovely young lady with a lovely husband. They're a fantastic couple. She has not very lovely MS, and we were using Ocrevus to treat her MS. And she stopped the medicine for pregnancy. She gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, and she wanted to go back on her Ocrevus. Now, she had been breastfeeding, and her kid was 18 months old. 18 months old. And she wasn't allowed to go back on her Ocrevus. Now, she and I reestablished care together, and we did some investigations. We talked to the pediatrician, and all of us were aligned. All of us were on the same page that if you were to use Ocrevus in this woman and you were to breastfeed, that the baby would receive a very small amount of Ocrevus in the breast milk, and the stomach acid would immediately dissolve it. And as a result, we decided to go ahead and give thumbs up, and this patient started to take the Ocrevus despite breastfeeding, and guess what? Everything's been dandy like candy. Now, am I instructing you to do something off-label? No, I'm just sharing with you what one of my patients did with great success. Let's talk about a second option when discussing breastfeeding and Ocrevus. So there was a French paper done looking at pregnancy and MS, and in this French paper, they did something pretty cool, where they followed a cohort of women with MS who were on Ocrevus. They stopped Ocrevus, and then they got pregnant, and they stayed off Ocrevus, and they gestated for 9 months off Ocrevus, and then they delivered the baby off Ocrevus, and then they breastfed for, on average, 120 days, which is not a short amount of time. And after 120 days of breastfeeding, they started back on Ocrevus. And in this study, not a single woman had an MS attack. The thing is, when you've been on Ocrevus for a minute, really like a year, and you stop the Ocrevus, it doesn't resolve in 6 months. It actually can take much longer to do that. And as a result, these women were able to carry pregnancies, to gestate, deliver, and to breastfeed without any return of disease activity. So here are just 2 ways that we might be able to address that. That was a great question. I'm really glad I got a chance to answer it. Let's take another question before we move on. And this is a great question coming from Frisco 237. So Frisco 237 writes, is it recommended to train to a maximum of our physical activity with MS? So what I think Frisco is asking is can you push it when you're exercising? So back in the 60s, doctors said something kind of dumb. They said, oh, honey, don't go outside. Don't get off the couch. Don't sweat. Don't exercise. You might explode, right? Which is BS. And it turns out that recommendation is not a very good recommendation at all. It turns out that people who exercise as part of their lifestyle end up less disabled at the end of their lives compared to those that don't. It turns out that exercise is one of the least appreciated, most important disease-modifying therapies that currently exists for MS. And in fact, I want all of the people that I'm working with to be exercising as part of their lifestyle. Now, this question is, can I push it? Can I really push the envelope when I'm exercising? Can I try to sprint a little farther? Can I try to lift a little more? Can I try to be a bit more competitive? And the answer is yes, right? Because you can't make your MS worse through exercise. In other words, you can't exercise really, really hard and then damage your spinal cord, or exercise really, really hard and cause more damage to the brain. What can happen is if you exercise really hard, you can get overheated. You can make old MS lesions kind of rear their ugly head and temporarily come back out. And when your body cools back down, all those symptoms will go away. I'm going to give you an example from a patient of mine after we do this MS Water Challenge. Yum. So I have a patient who likes to run marathons, which I think is gross. But she doesn't think it's gross. She thinks it's awesome. And she's a marathoner. And as her life was going along, and she noted that if she ran more than 3 miles, her right leg would go numb. And that scared her. And so she stopped running. And she got really depressed as a result of not running because that's her groove thing. And she came and saw me really upset and said, you know, I haven't been running for a couple months and I'm really missing it. And when I asked why, she goes, well, I don't want to make my disease worse because if I start running and I run 3 miles, my right leg goes numb. And I had to explain to her some good news, that her right leg going numb was not evidence of hurting her body. It was just an old symptom kind of coming back out. And that as soon as her body cooled down, the leg would not be numb anymore. And once she realized that she wasn't going to cause permanent damage, she made a very small change to her running technique. She dropped her head a little bit so that she could see her leg when she was running. So now, after mile 3, when she's running and she can't feel her leg. Even though she can't feel her leg, she can see the leg, and so she knows where she's placing it so that she can then be successful. Now, this young lady has used this technique of running despite a numb leg, and she's run multiple marathons over several years now, which is really awesome. And every time I talk to her, she goes, yeah, my leg goes numb, but I don't care. I know it's not going to hurt me, and as soon as I cool back down, my body goes back to normal. So, should you push it? Yeah, I want you to push it. Now, you can run into a problem where you have a really great day at the gym, and then the next day you're in bed, because it's going to take you a day or so to recover. And you might say, well, gosh, Aaron, that doesn't sound very good. And so I simply want to implement one caveat. The way that you function the day after your exercise should determine if you overdid it. Not during the exercise, because during the exercise, we can sort of have that gym moment where everything's awesome and we can do all the things. And if you do that and the next day you're in bed, and you weren't planning on being in bed the next day, then you probably overdid it a little. So if you don't budget to be in bed the next day, then what I want you to do is I want you to back off enough that the next day is normal, and use the next day as the metric for did I overdo it or not. So that was a great question. I'm really glad that we asked that. And I want to take a poll. All right, so let me see if I can put up a poll here. Start a poll. Let's see. Should I start my micro lecture on MS Biosimilars? Yes? No. All right. So I put a poll up there, and I'm asking you the question, should I start this lecture that I've prepared on biosimilars? I have about a 10-slide lecture that I've prepared for you guys today. So if there's enough interest and you guys would like to learn a little bit about biosimilars and MS, vote yes. And if that doesn't sound like a good thing to do on a Saturday morning live stream, then please vote no. And in the meantime, I'm going to switch up the scene and take another question. So let's switch the scene around. We're going to go to the river scene, and we've got the river cam in the river scene. Good stuff going on. We'll throw a little flame action in there. That's fun. And while we're waiting for that question for folks to respond, let's take another question from the live stream audience. All right. So Bluthton has a question. Bluthton always has fantastic questions. He's one of our wonderful moderators and an OG on this channel. So Bluthton writes, assuming Lemtrada successfully stops disease activity, how often will patients need to see a neurologist? Risk of renewed activity years afterwards. So that's a great question. And I think it really gets to the concept of remission. All right. So I define remission as absence of disease activity for 5 years in the absence of treatment. So if you're taking, let's say, Tysabri, which is a highly effective medicine, a very good MS medicine, and you're taking it the way you're supposed to once a month, and you're not having any disease activity, you're not in remission. You're being treated successfully. Things are going great, but you're not in remission. You're just being actively treated, which is wonderful. There is, however, a different situation, and I've fortunately seen this with some of my patients with Lemtrada, where they receive Lemtrada and then they don't have any disease activity. And they go year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, and now they've gone out past 5 years and they haven't had any disease activity, and they're living their best life. Now, remission is not a cure. It's not. Remission is a state where you don't have disease activity that's discernible, but you haven't cured the disease. And yes, you could see ongoing disease activity. So the name of the game in that setting is to monitor the patient. So how do we do that? Well, after 5 years, we don't need to check REMS labs anymore with Lemtrada. So there will be a point in time when we stop checking labs routinely. Why? Because the risks associated with Lemtrada are time locked for about 5 years. So we don't have to check beyond that, which is lovely. But there is ongoing potential risk for disease activity. So what do we need to look for? We need to look for MS attacks because those are possible. I'll give you an example. This morning, one of my patients, a lovely, lovely patient who has relapsing MS and has been successfully treated with Lemtrada, has had about 4 days of blurred vision, and her legs feel heavy and her hand is numb. That's concerning for an attack. And she's not having any new signs or symptoms of infection, and we're going to treat her with steroids. Now, she has maintained a long-standing relationship with me in my office, even though she's been stable from her Lemtrada for years and years. And rightfully so, because we didn't predict that on this holiday weekend that she would suffer from an attack, and that she did. And so she has to maintain that relationship so we know what's going on with her. Now, if she had left my clinic after her Lemtrada and I hadn't seen her in 6 years, there's no way that we could have had a phone call conversation and a quick consult on the phone and figured out, yes, in fact, we do need to do that. So that's one example. Another thing that we need to do is we need to do MRIs. Why do we need to do MRIs? Because even though you look and feel great, you could have new breakthrough disease on the MRI. And if you have new breakthrough disease on the MRI, that tells me that the disease is more active than we want. And that might be rationale for more Lemtrada or another disease-modifying therapy. And I can give you example after example where a patient of mine has received Lemtrada and they're killing it, they're doing wonderful, and yet they have a new spot on the MRI, and so then we treat again. Similarly, if you're having a new progression of neurological disability where you're having PIRA, progression independent from relapse activity, this is another time when we need to be constantly observing the patient so that we can check their exam and see what exactly is getting worse so that we can intervene. So the bottom line is, if you've been successfully treated with Lemtrada and everything is quiet as quiet could be, congratulations, but you want to maintain your relationship with your neurologist to make sure that if something changes in the future, that you're ready to jump on top of it. So that was a great question, Bluthton. Thank you very much. Going up to our live stream, we've had 117 votes, and there are over 230 of you on the line. So that means that some of you have not yet answered the polling question. Please, please answer the polling question. It's completely free to answer. Just go and click that polling button. If you haven't answered yet, please, I would be so appreciative if you would do that. I want to try to get a higher percentage of people that have answered the question. So please take just a quick moment. There's 230 some of you that are already online. So let's see if we can get a higher percentage of people voting before we decide whether or not I give that impromptu lecture. Bluthton, you're very welcome. It's always a pleasure to answer your questions. All right, so here's a question that our moderator Darla put forward, and this question is from 123 Sean Video. It says, I have neuropathy in my hands and feet. I use Gabapentin 100 milligrams, but it doesn't work. What can I do? All right, so a couple things. Number one, I can't give you specific advice for you, right? So you know that. So this is a general answer just to educate. Number two, the word neuropathy in neurology has a very, very specific meaning. It means damage to the nerves, not the spinal cord or brain. So To be extremely technical, if you have multiple sclerosis, you're more likely to have damage from your cord. That's called myelopathy and not neuropathy. But I'm assuming that what you mean when you say neuropathy is just that you have changes in sensation in the hands and feet. So for the sake of the conversation, I'm going to say this is MS and you're having numbness in your hands and feet that hurt. And that leads us to the question of, hey, I'm taking gabapentin and I'm not responding. So what do I do? Well, the first thing is that your dose of gabapentin is extremely low, like super low. So when I treat people with MS for neuropathic pain, I find that you need a higher dose than 100 milligrams. So I oftentimes will start people at 300 milligrams taken 3 times a day. And so that's where I begin treating with gabapentin, with Neurontin. And after you've been on 300 3 times a day, we see how things are going. I may increase the dose upwards of 9 to 1200 3 times a day or even 4 times a day. So my first comment is one of the things that we could do if you tolerate gabapentin is we could use a higher dose. If we can't use a higher dose because you don't tolerate it or for whatever other reason, there's fortunately a host of other medicines that can be used to treat neuropathic pain. And so I would either A, go up on the dose, or B, I would switch to a different medication. That was a great question. Now, there's been 148 votes now of the 234 people that are online, and 81% of you said that you would like to see this lecture. So I think, what the hey, let's do it. Let's switch lectures.
What the hey?
And I really appreciate you guys voting. So we're going to end this poll. And we're going to change it up, and I'm going to give you a quick lecture after I come back from a bio break. So don't run away. I'm going to use the facilities really quick like a bunny rabbit, and as soon as I get back, we will start this impromptu lecture on biosimilars. Please don't run away. Woo. All right, guys. Thank you for your patience with my rather old bladder. I am back and ready to start this mic lecture. I'll tell you, as your bladder approaches 50, I need to be closer and closer to a bathroom. MS Water Challenge, yo. Okay, so let's start off, and I've got a bunch of things here that I want to teach you about. The topic of this discussion is biosimilars in multiple sclerosis. Or we could say, what the hell is a biosimilar and why do I need to know about it? And I want to start off by sharing this research paper with you. Except now, of course, it's not working. Here we go. Okay, all right. So this article is extremely upsetting to me. It's bothersome to me. Fingolimod, which is an oral agent to treat MS that came out, it became FDA approved on a patent in October of 2010, is now no longer on patent. So after 10 years, drugs go off patent. And when they go off patent, they can be turned into generics. And so now in 2023, almost 2024, there are several generic Gilenias that are on the market. Generic Gilenias. And here's a paper which looked at some of these generic Gilenias, and what it found was very disturbing. Gilenya assay analysis of U.S. generic capsule products reveals variation in fingolimod content beyond the recommended acceptable criteria. In English, when they studied these generic molecules, these generic Gilenyas, they found that they weren't the same as branded Gilenya. And in fact, there was significant variation. In some of the generic Gilenyas were really, really different than the actual product. And so that's super disturbing. And I want to spend some time sharing with you why I think this is an important topic and what we need to know to avoid risk. All right, so first of all, we have to do a little bit of definitions. All right, so the first definition that I want to teach you during this micro lecture is what is a biologic. Okay, so a biologic is a type of medicine which is made from a living source. So it's a medicine which is either made from a human or from an animal. And it's a medicine which is made from a living source, which is not taken as a pill. It's either taken as a shot or as an infusion. All right, so let me explain to you why. On this picture, and I don't know how to get, let's see if I can make things a little easier. I'm going to hide the chat just so that it doesn't interfere with the screen, so you can see most of the screen there. What you see in this picture are 3 examples of MS medications. So on the far left, you see teriflunomide, which is the long name for Aubagio. So Aubagio is a pill which is used to treat MS. It's a pill that you take once a day, and it's considered a small molecule. And if you look just under where it says small molecule, you can see a little itty bitty tiny drawing of the molecular structure of teriflunomide, of Aubagio. So Aubagio is a small molecule, and it's made in a laboratory with chemicals. You know, they do different chemical processes, and they synthesize this small molecule of teriflunomide. And when teriflunomide goes off-label, teriflunomide is now off-label, then you can make a generic. And all you have to do to make a generic is you have to make a molecule that looks pretty similar to that molecule, all right? So you go to a laboratory and you mix up some chemicals and you make a chemical structure which looks similar to teriflunomide. And they never ever have to test it in humans. So you heard me right. If you take a generic small molecule, it doesn't have to be tested in human beings. As long as the generic manufacturer can demonstrate that it looks like the original molecule, that's good enough for the American FDA. And they say, okay, well, that's close enough, then you can approve that and you can give that to humans, even though it's never ever been tested in humans. If you look at the next category, if you look in the middle there, where it says glutarimer acetate. And glutarimer acetate, which is the code name for Copaxone, is a non-biologic complex drug. So it's not a biologic, it's not made by a human or an animal. It's still a complex set of chemicals, but it's complex, it's bigger. And you can see in the center there, the structure of glutarimer acetate is larger than the structure of teriflunomide. And just like with a small molecule, a non-biologic complex drug, if you make a generic, and there are many generics of glutarimer acetate, you do not have to study it in human beings. You do not have to prove that it works in humans. All you have to do is show the FDA that it looks similar. And that is really, really bothersome to me. Now, if you look at the third column, the one that I have in that box, you see the word rituximab. So rituximab is an off-label treatment for multiple sclerosis. It's a very effective one. It's a monoclonal antibody. It's a biologic smart bomb, and it is a biologic agent. Remember the definition that we threw up of a biologic agent just a second ago is a biologic agent is a medicine which it's developed from a living source, so human or animal, and it's given as a shot or an infusion. So this rituximab molecule is not a chemical that you mix in a lab. It's an antibody, and they use living cells to generate it. So they use living mammalian cells to create that molecule, which is pretty darn interesting. And the reason that it has to be given via infusion is because if you take that structure, which is mostly protein and sugars, and you swallow it, it goes in your stomach, and your stomach does exactly what it does with any protein or sugar. It dissolves it. So if you eat steak, your stomach dissolves it. If you eat a monoclonal antibody, which is made of protein and fat, protein and sugar, you're going to dissolve it. And so they have to be infused in the vein. Now, here's the thing. Biosimilars are not like generics. A biosimilar is a biologic medicine which is very, very similar to a reference medicine. So a biosimilar is another biologic which is very similar in structure to a biological agent. So here we have the biologic agent rituximab, and a biosimilar to rituximab would be a molecule that looks just like rituximab, all right? And it's also made from human or an animal. And it is held to an extremely high standard. It's actually held essentially to the same standard that the original biologic was held to. So we call the original biologic the reference medicine, all right? Or the innovator medicine. It's the first one. And then when you make a biosimilar, it has to not just be very, very similar in structure to that reference, but it also has to be tested in humans to prove that it works as well as the reference. So let's take it a step further. This picture, which I stole from the internet, shows you on the left the way that we develop reference biologics. So that would be like branded drugs like rituximab, Tysabri, Lemtrada, Ocrevus, stuff like that, all right? And it starts at the bottom and then goes up. So at the bottom, you do a chemical analysis of the antibody, and then you test it in monkeys in preclinical testing before you get to humans. And then you study its behavior in humans with the PK/PD. PK stands for, what does PK/PD stand for? I just blanked on it. Pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. And those are doctor words for the way the molecule is absorbed in the human body and the way that you get rid of the molecule. And so they study PK/PD of the molecule of the biologic in a human. Then they do extensive clinical testing in humans. So as an MS neurologist and clinical trialist, I have done 20 years now of various MS clinical trials where we get a product where we've studied the analytics, we've studied the preclinical, we've studied the PK/PD, and now we're going to test it in people with MS to prove that it works. And that's how you get a drug FDA approved if it's a biologic. Now, to approve a biosimilar, it's different. Look on the right. And we're going to start at the bottom and go up. When you're dealing with a biosimilar, the first thing that you do is you do a lot of analytical characterization proving that the molecule that you made looks exactly like the molecule, or looks very, very, very similar, I should say, to the reference molecule. And you see there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into structuring the new biologic so that it looks like the other biologic. So the biosimilar is very, 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 very similar to the original biologic, the reference one. Then once you've done that, then you do a small investigation in monkeys in preclinical testing. Then you do a small investigation looking at the PK/PD, meaning you want to see how the new biosimilar is absorbed and excreted in the human body to make sure that it's very, very similar to the reference drug. And then lastly, you do clinical trials. So in a biosimilar molecule, just like with a reference biologic, you do clinical trials to prove that the drug works. And so I'm going to use biosimilar Tysabri as an example. So Tysabri is a biologic agent, all right? Tysabri is a monoclonal antibody. It's an antibody made of protein and sugars, and it's made in mammalian cells, and it's one of the most effective MS medicines that's out there, right? Definitely in the top several. And what we have found is Tysabri is off of its patent. It's been around since 2004. And there is now a biosimilar Tysabri that's hit the market. And the reason I'm giving this lecture is because you need to know what the hey a biosimilar is so that you can have an engaged conversation with your neurologist. And what you see here, starting at the bottom going up, is the path that a company took to get approval of the biosimilar natalizumab. So they started off by making a monoclonal antibody, and the biosimilar looked very, very similar to the reference drug, which is Tysabri. Then they went to preclinical testing, and they did this in monkeys, and they found that it seemed to be copacetic in monkeys. And then they went to the PK/PD, where they tested the drugs in about 450 healthy controls. So not people with MS, but just humans. And they gave them the Tysabri, and they gave them the new biosimilar to see how it was absorbed in the body and how the body got rid of it. And what they found was it was near identical. I'll show you that in a second. And then lastly, they did a clinical trial in multiple sclerosis with not very many people, with just 265 people. And I'll show you that as well. All right. So let's take a second and let me show you some of that data. Whoops, wrong button. All right, so what you see here is the PK/PD. So this is the pharmacokinetics dynamics of the medicine. And what you see is in the red, this is the reference Tysabri, the branded Tysabri in the United States. And in the black is the new biosimilar, and they completely overlap. What this teaches scientists is that the biosimilar natalizumab behaves the same in the human body as does the reference Tysabri. And then when you take it a step further, this is the clinical trial. And in the clinical trial, what you see is people with relapsing MS were randomly assigned to either take the gray, and the gray bar is 131 people that got the new drug, the biosimilar natalizumab, or in the green, 133 people got reference arm actual Tysabri. And then we saw how they behaved. And here's how they behaved. This graph shows you MRI lesions. And what you see is there was no difference going out 48 weeks in the number of new spots that someone had on the reference arm Tysabri compared to the biosimilar natalizumab. That's very reassuring. And then they look at clinical features, and what they found was the disability was the same in both, and the relapse rate was the same in both. Lastly, they looked at safety. And what they found was the risk of infections, the risk of death, the risk of side effects making you stop the drug were the same in one medication, the biosimilar, as compared to the reference arm Tysabri. And so that concludes the didactic of this live stream. Thank you very, very much for allowing me to kind of share that with you. If you liked this quick micro lecture, do me a favor and write so in the comments. I noticed that we went from 220 some people down to like 180. Maybe that means that you guys weren't feeling the love in the air. But do me a favor and let me know, did you like that didactic? Did you like that micro lecture? So I'll throw that up in the chat here. And if you did like that micro lecture, give me a comment in the comments section or throw up some hearts and let me know that was something that you enjoyed and that you'd like to see more things like that in the future. All right, so moving along, it looks like there's been a bunch of questions that I may have missed when I was giving that lecture. And so let me try to find a question or two that maybe I missed. And while we're waiting for that, let me just throw up a couple questions that I've prepped ahead of time. So this is a question from Drew Snyder, who writes, any thoughts on lion's mane mushroom? And so lion's mane mushroom is fascinating. Now, I am not a mycologist, all right? So I am not an expert in mushrooms. And I have read all the literature available on lion's mane and MS, which is essentially near none. Lion's mane is a naturally growing mushroom. It's kind of beautiful looking, and it kind of looks like a lion's mane, hence the name. I'm told that it tastes like fish. And so some people have gotten a hold of lion's mane, the physical mushroom, and sliced it and grilled it, and they say that it kind of tastes like fish, which I think is lovely. And lion's mane is heralded as helping with a lot of really cool things involving the brain. The way that lion's mane is supposed to work is really interesting. It imitates some of the structures that support neuronal growth and provides structures that support neuronal growth. And so there's some evidence in mice that lion's mane might help rebuild brain, which for someone with a brain condition sounds really, really attractive. Now, anecdotally, and particularly from Chinese medicine, there's some belief that lion's mane may help humans with cognitive function. This has not been proven. And lion's mane is available. I think that it's a safe supplement. I would recommend that you check out a reputable source to purchase lion's mane. And I'll give a shout out to Fresh Caps. So Fresh Caps is an online company run by a mycologist. The Real Deal Holyfield is out of California. He's got a great website with a lot of information in it. I have no affiliation with Fresh Caps. They don't know me at all. I just think they make a good product. And they sell lion's mane. And so I am comfortable with somebody taking lion's mane. Now, can I look you in the eyes and say that absolutely for a limited time only, for $9.99, if you take some lion's mane, you're going to think more clearly? No, I can't say that at all. But as long as the lion's mane isn't dangerous, and I do not believe that it is, as long as it's not too expensive, and only you can determine for you and your family's budget whether lion's mane is too expensive, and as long as it's not instead of something that we know works, boy, I am game for you to try it. So those are my opinions about lion's mane. I think it's a pretty interesting, very, very interesting mushroom. So here's another question, and this one is from Zepper, who writes, are there some special precautions that we need while traveling? Anything other than avoiding heat and overstressing? And so I have several YouTube videos on this topic. I have a couple YouTube videos on the channel about vacationing with MS. I also have a YouTube video, I think I entitled it like the MS Toolkit or the MS Emergency Kit, something like this, where I go through a host of things that you might want to consider before you go traveling or vacationing with multiple sclerosis. So just for the interest of the discussion, let's go over a couple of them right now. And I'm almost out of water. I don't even have enough water to do a proper MS water challenge. Just a little sip, but it was delicious. So let's talk about some things that you might need to do. Number one, I want you to make sure that you bring extra medicine. So bring extra, at least a day or two extra of all the different medicines that you take for spasticity, for pain, for bladder, etc. And I want you to pack them on your carry-on. Please don't make the error of putting it with your checked luggage and then having your checked luggage get lost and then you don't have any of your medicines. That's bad news bears. So that's the first thing. If you take an MS shot, and if you're going to be taking that with you, you need to take extra precautions to know how to travel with that shot. And so you're going to want to check with the airlines to find out what's allowed and if you have to refrigerate the shot, etc., etc. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I would prepare a piece of paper with phone numbers on it. So I would include the phone number of my neurologist, the phone number of my primary care doctor, the phone number of my emergency contact, and the phone number of my pharmacy. And I would probably laminate that and I would keep it in my carry-on. That way, God forbid, if there's a problem and you need to talk to your American neurology constituents, then you can get a hold of them. And that can be very, very important. Number three, I would consider where I'm going as it relates to the topography and geography. So for example, some parts of Europe are very, very hilly and do not have railings. And so I want you to know that before you go there. If you have trouble navigating on uneven surfaces and you're going to Strasbourg in France, you got a problem because the vast majority of the walking paths are cobblestone. And we're going to need to kind of make plans ahead of time for that. I also want you to bring some cooling devices. And so a cooling vest, cooling kerchiefs, even an electric fan can be very, very helpful. And one last comment, I could talk about this for a year, but one last comment is I want you to be very judicious about what you choose and don't choose to do. What I mean by that is there's a sentiment when you go on vacation that you better get all the things in. Anything and everything that you can do, you better do them all right? Because we may never get to go back to this location, and it's very exciting. But the problem is that it's really easy to overdo it. And you may do all the things and then spend a couple days in bed. So I think that traveling with MS is 100% doable. It's super, super a good idea, I think. I think traveling is an awesome way of living life. But I think that you want to be very planful when you travel. And if you want to hear more tips and tricks, definitely check out my videos on the YouTube channel where I've got a lot more to share on the topic. All right, let's change up the scene a little bit and let me take a question. One of my favorite questions. The King of Kings writes in the following question. Any tips for intercourse? My favorite topic. Any tips for intercourse? I felt I'm not as before, especially when I became diabetic after my steroid course in 2013. All right, so sex is a really important part of adult life. And sex is a huge determinant for quality of life. Otherwise stated, if you want to make someone miserable, mess with their ability to enjoy intercourse, and they will be miserable. And so I think that in the spirit of helping someone live their very best life despite having a chronic condition like MS, the better part of valor is to help them be successful in the bedroom. Now, as you can imagine, I've got a bunch of YouTube videos exactly on this topic, but it's such an important topic. Let's spend a few minutes now talking about it. The number one thing that you can do, the most important thing that you can do is communicate with your partner. Now, I don't mean communicate in the middle of intercourse, like lift your leg. I'm talking about before you have intercourse, before you're naked. If you can be intimate with another human being, you should be able to have a conversation with that human being. And during this conversation, the more communication, the more sharing, the more successful you'll be in the bedroom. Let me explain what I mean. Very commonly, partners will have sex the exact same way every single time and not talk about it. So first we do the kissing, then you lay like this, and then I lay like this, and then we do that other thing that you like, and then we turn the lights off, and then we change the position, and then we go bam, 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 bam. You have like a series of things that you do without thinking about it. And sometimes those things, which worked great when you were 24, don't work so well when you're in your mid-40s or 50s and you have multiple sclerosis. And so I think that we need to be talking. All right, so what do we need to be talking about? Well, what's the best time of day? Now, many couples never thought about that because they always have sex at 9 p.m. Why? Because that's the very first time they see each other when their kids are asleep and not screaming. And so all day long, they're busy, 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 busy. And then all evening long, they're dealing with the kids, and they don't even really see each other until after the kids go to bed. Which may be the worst time on the planet for you to have sex with MS because you are absolutely exhausted. You've been exhausted for 4 or 5 hours. All you can do is hope to get to bed, and now your partner wants to touch you? Excuse me? And so you want to talk to your partner about, hey, listen, I would love to have sex with you, but I need to do it in the morning. We literally need to get up early and set our alarm so that we can have intercourse in the morning when I have enough energy, when I'm not completely exhausted. And so talking to your partner about the timing of intercourse is very, very important. What else? Talking about goals of intercourse. So what do I mean, goals of intercourse? Well, to a 18-year-old boy, there's typically one goal of intercourse. Bam, 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 want to have a mind-shattering orgasm and then go out and play football or something like this, right? And that's not always the goal of intercourse. Some people, they're not able to achieve orgasm. Or sometimes someone who can achieve orgasm doesn't think they're going to be able to do it that particular day. Does that mean that they can't have sex? No, it just means that we need to have a conversation about what our goals are. So You may say to your partner, look, I would love to get naked with you. I'm not going to be able to have an orgasm. I'm not looking to have an orgasm. I'm looking to spend intimate time with you naked. I'm looking at being close to you. I'm looking at helping you achieve orgasm, but that's not my goal today. And if the two of you can clarify that before you start, things work out so much better. I've seen situations where, and let's take for this example that the patient is the wife married to a man, her husband, and the patient has some sexual dysfunction, and the husband thinks he's an inadequate lover. He thinks that the wife, his partner, doesn't like him or doesn't find him attractive because they're not being successful in the bedroom. Well, the reality is the wife can't feel the down theirs, and she's not being successful having an orgasm. And it's not that she doesn't like her partner. She loves him. She finds him attractive. She wants to have intercourse with him, but she can't achieve orgasm. And if they have a conversation and he realizes that and she can express that, the bedroom becomes much more enjoyable. You also need to have a conversation about what things you choose to do, like which positions you choose to get in. Because, again, almost by rote, we may always fall into the exact same patterns. And the missionary style position that you've been using for the last 20 years might cause your partner with MS to have spasms and cramps and neuropathic pain and all kinds of things. And so you need to have a conversation about what positions do you like, what positions don't work for you, and what are some things that you want to try but you've never tried before. And if you have this conversation with your partner, what you find is that things are much more successful. Now, again, I could go on for quite some time and talk about other options to improve intercourse in MS. Suffice it to say that it's a very, very important topic. And if you'd like to learn more about it, I have a bunch of things, YouTube videos on the topic right on this channel. Now, we've been going for just about an hour, and I'm going to start to wrap up now. You guys have been more than amazing. We've had consistently nearly over 200 people for a good portion of this live stream. I think that's extremely successful. I want to thank each and every one of you. If this is the first time that you've listened to a live stream, thank you very much. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. Give a like and leave a comment. Those are ways that the YouTube algorithm learns that you like this content, and ultimately it helps push it out so more people impacted by MS can benefit. My name's Aaron Boster. I'm an MS neurologist here in sunny Columbus, Ohio, and I do these live streams once a month, typically the last weekend of every month. If you look in the chat, I just listed the link to the Boster Corner, which is a newsletter which we put out every month. And in the newsletter is when I will go live. So please consider subscribing to the newsletter, and that way you'll be constantly reminded and you'll never miss any. I will continue to put out videos every Monday morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to help up your game. I have a goal of energizing, empowering, and educating families impacted by MS, and that's what those videos are for. And again, I want to say thank you to all of you. This channel is growing. It's amazing to see and to feel, and I couldn't do it without you guys. So until my next live stream, that'll be the December live stream, or until my next Monday morning video, this is Aaron Boster saying thank you from the bottom of my heart. Be safe and take care. Have a great holiday weekend, guys. Bye-bye.